Each moment of responding to it mindfully instead of reacting to it compulsively lessens the momentum of old mind. Each time we relate to anger instead of from it lessens its seductive quality, its mechanical, compulsive reactivity, which has so often propelled action. Right, hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to come on and read an excerpt from the book Ordinary Magic today. It's called Being with Anger by Stephen Levine. I think this is really important and useful. This is like a tool. So if you struggle with anger or you're struggling in your personal life in feeling like a victim and not being able to control your emotions and having a hard time like handling and carrying it all, this video is for you. So get comfortable, kick back, relax, put on some headphones, or make sure that you don't have any distractions, and let me take you through this. Being with Anger by Stephen Levine. Before one thinks of doing good, one must seriously contemplate removing oneself from doing harm. Before we can play with the angels of our compassion, we need to make tea with the demons of our holding. To meet these hobgoblins like Milarepa, I'm not even really sure who or what that is. Milarepa, we approach open-handedly, offering sweets to the tricksters, watching them regress, curled childlike by the fire, sucking at the breast of loving kindness. Most people are basically kind and gentle, but haven't yet cured themselves of the reactive, injurious quality of their anger. Few have taken tea with their outrage or confusion. Most try to push it away, causing it to explode unconsciously into a world already overflowing with violence and reactivity. Few, in order to cultivate the quality of harmlessness in their lives, have taken responsibility for their anger. To take responsibility for our anger means to relate to it instead of from it. To be responsible to our anger is to bring it within the realm of the voluntary. To react to it leaves life frozen in the mechanical action of old mind. Responsibility enters the moment anew. Reactivity is the same old thing. To react to our anger is to roll the boulders of fear and distrust into the mouth of our cave. To respond to it is to invite it in for tea, to meet it eye to eye in the light that streams through the wide entrance to our cavern. It is seldom we meet our anger so completely. We are usually quite unfamiliar with its presence until we become enraged. We seldom meet anger in its infancy because we have a tendency to deny it and judge it as bad, and so we don't notice its subtler quality on first arousal. This shadowy comprehension of our anger is a byproduct of our having pulled back too often from the unpleasant, from becoming angry at ourselves for becoming angry. Everyone has anger because everyone has desires. It comes with territory. It comes with the territory. Desire leads to anger. As desire moves towards its fulfillment, if something arises to block it, frustration occurs. Relating directly to anger, we explore its roots. Examining the momentum of desire, one comes to understand deeply the push and pull of the mind, the nature of frustration itself, the feeling of not having, of more wanting, a denseness, a tightening, a nausea. Watching frustration closely, one explores the point where it flicks over into anger. It is very important that we explore our anger so we are not perpetually reacting to the vicissitudes of the world, leaving the debris of unfinished business in our wake. Anger unexplored breeds anger. Anger explored leads to harmony. Exploring anger, we discover how isolated we feel when angry. When we are angry, everything in the world is an other. In anger, we are already in so much pain we can hardly stand it, yet the merciless, reactive mind thinks we deserve further punishment. In fact, what would be a greater curse than if someone were to say, "May you be angry the rest of your life"? We would see and smell and taste nothing. Our life would shrivel to a fearful defense of imagined safe territory. We would not even be able to touch the world because anger acts as a film across the senses. It blocks reception. Indeed, as we watch frustration closely, we see that anger arises uninvited and has a life of its own, a momentum from all the previous moments of identifying with anger, becoming angry and separate. But meeting frustration in don't know, nothing tightens down on the content to obscure the natural unfolding of its process as we learn to respond to it instead of reacting angrily. Reacting to anger creates the violence, the abuse, the separation which pains us so. As mercy develops, we see how painful it is to be in anger, and we are reminded to soften, to look gently on it as it arises, and we realize that we don't have to hellishly react, impulsively putting ourselves and the whole world out of our heart. Sensing the power of non-injury, we begin to respond to ourselves as we would to a frightened child, with a deeper kindness and care. We have been taught that there were only two things we could do with our anger. One was to reactively suppress it. The other was to reactively spit it out. But both are forms of attachment to anger. One is condemning, the other a clinging. What is ironic is that when we examine anger, we notice that no matter how much we have emoted this feeling, we have never felt rid of it for long. We become exhausted before we can get it all out. The involuntary emoting of anger just creates more of the same. There are, at this time, some very skillful means of working with suppressed anger that involve bringing it to the surface. For those who have difficulty making contact with their anger, there are ways of stimulating it, such as beating on a mattress or screaming, which therapists have skillfully employed. Because nothing which is not accepted can be healed. Some people need to bring up anger to have direct access to it. This is a technique that must be used in a very balanced manner so that anger brought to the surface can be investigated without being identified with as self. It takes most balanced of therapists to help one uncover anger without trapping one in identification with its dynamics. Exploring its nature, we discover how unskillful it can be to suppress anger. Pushing it down, it accumulates beyond the reach of our ordinary awareness. It has access to you, but you no longer have access to it. It drives you. It motivates you. It makes choices for you, but you can't see who has the reins in their hands because it is suppressed below the level of awareness. And just as we can see that we can't get it all out, we notice that we can't suppress it quite completely either. We are always ready to explode or implode. Thus, we come to recognize a third alternative with anger and other heavy states. Rather than pushing them down or spitting them out, we can let them come gently into our awareness. We can start to give them space, to get a sense of their texture, of their voice, of their inclination. We begin to investigate the nature of the anger instead of getting lost in my anger. Indeed, to give anger space takes courage. It takes acceptance, which, interestingly enough, is the exact opposite of anger. Anger and fear are both strong aversion reactions. Acceptance is a welcoming response. The very act of accepting anger begins to melt it and gives access to subtler and subtler levels of holding. Acceptance takes the mask off anger and lets you look at it straight in the eye. It allows anger to come and allows it to go. I've seen people sitting in meditation, their clothes drenched with perspiration, having come upon the deep magma of their impotent rage, just trying to stay with the moment a breath at a time. If that underground fire is brought to the surface, it might light our way. When we see that anger is not a single state of mind and begin to experience it in its unfolding, frustration flipping over into intense wanting, flipping over into feelings of abandonment, into not having, into self-pity, into righteousness, into pride, into aggression, into confusion, back into self-pity and pride again. One can come to ask oneself, which of these states is anger? As we relate to it instead of from it, we see that anger is a process. We notice in our investigation of frustration a certain quality of stress that permeates the mind-body. Some react to stress with anger, others with fear. Seeing clearly each state as it momentarily predominates allows us to break mind's automatic chain of events. We are able to reside a bit more in being itself, the space in which anger is unfolding without getting lost in its content. Not suffering from the mistaken identity that we are the anger, we instead recognize in space the tightness passing through. Anger or fear are the inevitable momentum of old mind, which, deeply observed, begins to lose its power. Recognizing the well-forged and deeply imprinted links in this chain of action and reaction, we recognize how natural it is to have anger. As natural as the underlying frustration, the underlying desire. But when we understand the naturalness of anger, we no longer back away in shock. We see that each moment of its arisal is an opportunity for practice, for awareness and mercy. Recognizing, for instance, that we may be angry 10,000 more times. The next time the anger arises, we meet it as Milarepa met the ogres at the mouth of his cave and invited in for closer inspection. Take tea, make yourself comfortable, warm yourself by the fire. Then anger can begin to float, and instead of 10,001 more times of anger, there may only be 9,999. Each moment of responding to it mindfully instead of reacting to it compulsively lessens the momentum of old mind. Each time we relate to anger instead of from it lessens its seductive quality, its mechanical, compulsive reactivity, which has so often propelled action. I remember once looking at the 10 rules of practice on a wall of a monastery. One of the rules was don't be angry, and I thought, no one is going to get enlightened in this place. For how is one going to get liberated if one excludes anything from investigation? When someone says to you, don't be angry, that means don't be. To allow anger to come into being without becoming it takes a very delicate balance. But to react to anger with fear is just more of the same old thing. Until anger, like boredom or restlessness, is equally invited into the heart of mindfulness, one will always be thrown off kilter by its momentary arisal. We have been very strongly conditioned not to be angry, usually by someone who was angry at the time. We cultivate a mercilessness with ourselves, and our judgment meets anger in an angry way. The hardness tightens. We become the object and subject of abuse. Anger, like all heavy states, even pain, is workable when we approach it with a merciful awareness. In fact, anger can be quite fascinating to watch. We begin to see anger's grade B script, its shadow boxing and interior monologue. They should have done this. They ought to be like that. If it was up to me, I'd do this. We watch it run out its game, and if we stay with it long enough, we notice, quite to our chagrin, that it begins the same old storyline all over again. We start to see the tape loop quality, the impersonal process, which repeats over and over again what it has already said, listening mercifully to the repeating images. The all too familiar insistence that we are right, the pride, the sense of rejection, the feeling of not being loved enough. We begin to have compassion for our anger and bring it a cup of tea. We begin to have mercy on that poor, painful state of mind, that compulsive violence to itself, that closedness, that hard living. Then anger reminds us to soften the belly, and that no one is an object, but all are a living suchness, baby flesh, ourselves. The exploration of such a state becomes a very interesting endeavor. You explore it, listen to it, feel it, come to know it. What is anger in the body? What is its voice in the mind? What is its tone of voice? What is the script it reads out? Are there other accompanying states of mind? What precedes it? What follows? The process unfolding in vast space. As our anger comes within the circle of responsibility, we get a sense of what it means to be fully alive. And that circle widens to allow more and more of our states of mind and the states of mind of our loved ones to come within the deep stillness of a choiceless investigation, a willingness to be. We no longer hide in the dark forest of reactivity, constantly ambushed by our feelings, frightened and hardened to the world. Instead, we go deep within and notice that if we add love to any situation we are angry about, the cause of anger dissolves. Staying with the changing qualities of anger in the mind-body, the words in the mind, the images, the denseness in the body, we discover under all this anger a deep sadness. Omitting nothing, the investigation continues into the sadness, all the moments of not having, all the frustrated griefs of a lifetime. And beneath that sadness, we discover an ocean of love beyond our wildest dreams. So the investigation of anger becomes an end of injury in the world and leads us directly to the love beneath, to our loving nature. When we bring anger into the area where we can respond to it, where we can investigate it, where we can embrace it, it emerges into the light of our wholeness. Then even anger does not close our heart. Then anger is no longer a hindrance, but a profound teacher, a reminder to go deeper, to discover what is real. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition speaks of taking anger and turning it around to motivate practice, because in anger are qualities like straightforwardness and resoluteness, which can be turned into commitment. It can be the anger of, I am not going to let my heart be closed a moment longer. Enough is enough. It is not a destructive anger. It is the creative urge to get on with our work. In anger's tendency towards reaction can be discovered an energy which can be redirected toward entering the moment wholeheartedly. Anger, too, has the quality of an unwillingness to allow things to remain as they are. Separated from its aggression, that quality of discontent can motivate us to take the path of healing. It is alchemy. We take the dross and turn it into gold. Then we see that anger has not been the problem. Our manner of relating to it has been the main problem. Having taken tea so many times with our anger, we are no longer frustrated or surprised by its deep tendency to draw identification, but mercifully acknowledge that the nature of the mind is to grasp, to think about itself, and instead of tightening in just more identification, more repulsion toward mind, toward the seat of pain, we learn to have mercy. We learn to let the mind be in the heart. We learn to love ourselves. Then we see how the nature of anger is resentment, an integral part of the armor about the heart. And we see that anger is a form of grief. It is a response to loss. It is a response to not getting what we want. We recognize that anything we are angry about, we are actually grieving over. And so our relating to anger becomes the grief work that calls on our heart for mercy and healing. In seeing what closes us, we can stay awake a millisecond longer than the next time. In making this much room in our heart for anger, we acknowledge that as at times our anger is so great that we have very little room for it. The thoughts are so seductive that identification automatically adheres and pride nurses it into flame. But that is only the beginning. We see that the mind, in its long personal history, feels every right to be angry, and we do not block that either. For we know that without permission to be angry, we don't have consent to be alive. So we allow anger to come wholeheartedly into the mind, instead of getting lost in the old way of trying to squeeze it into some manageable shape. When anger becomes so intense, so identified with that there is no space in the mind in which to investigate, you can come into the body and start to examine anger as sensation. Because often you can stay mindful of anger longer as sensation than you can as thought. It may be very difficult to examine fear in the frightened mind, but it is always accessible to exploration in the body. Its denseness, its rapidity of change, its tension quite noticeable in the gut, the throat, the lower back. Every state of mind has an accompanying, a concomitant state of body. By directing awareness into the body again and again to rediscover the body pattern of anger, the mind does not get sucked into reinforcing it, so that you can start to see some of its empty quality, so that some aspect of it at least can be touched with mercy and awareness. Theoretically, if we had no mind to be angry, still anger would be recognizable by the contractions and patterns it left in the body. Indeed, we could tell whether we were joyous or frightened, doubtful or expectant, by the bodily echo of these states. When we can't stay with the mind of anger, we always have access to the body of investigation. And there we can find at least one more millisecond of not being angry, but being with anger. One more opportunity for freedom from the old. When we relate wholeheartedly to emotions, we can let go of trying to be rational about emotion. To be rational about emotion is to try to fit a square peg in a round hole. Emotions have their own nature, just as thoughts have theirs. They are not the same. They are two separate levels of the mind. To try to be rational about emotions is to go crazy. The backwards are filled with people who are trying to think their feelings rather than experience them as they are. To attempt to make emotions rational is to cause great conflict within. But to simply watch how the mind emotes, how it smiles and frowns in reaction to the world, can give some insight into its natural unfoldings. Exploring the hindrances deeply, we attempt to make nothing other than it is, just to see its nature as it plays itself out, no longer angry at anger. When there is anger, there is just anger. When there is fear, there is just fear. When there is joy, there is just joy. We have room for it all. We take life as a blessing instead of a curse. Beautiful.